Margaret Councillor, I'm not sure if Deputy Danny Healy is here. You might let me know if he arrives. Councillor, I too am glad to be able to speak on this bill tonight, and we draw on the, I suppose, the bill. A lot of it draws on the positions that were turned up in the Supreme Court, or cases were outed. So it's very important that legislation that's made here and passed here in the Oireachtas applies equally to all the citizens, and it can be withstand the test of time. Sections 4, 5 and 6 and 7 of the bill amend provisions relating to mandatory sentences for second and subsequent firearms and misuse of drugs offences. And Section 8 and 9 of the bill provides for consequential amendments to the Criminal Justice Act 2007 and the Parole Act 2019, arising from the deletion of provisions set out in the bill. And some parts of the legislation here is going back to the foundation of the state. And it's so badly in need of reform. Because I want to put on record here my support for the ordinary men and women of Garda Síochána up and down the country. And I'd have to salute, the way they have been, out there at the front line doing their best. And I spent most of the morning Monday, a very pleasurable morning with Community Garda in Athlone and Care, Noel Lavin, proud Cockman. But based in Care for a number of years, visiting the elderly people in their homes as part of the community effort with COVID. And it was wonderful to see, and the people in a sense of hope. It was a lovely, beautiful morning, sense of hope in people after 13 arduous and long and frustrating months. And I salute Sergeant Ray Maloney and Sergeant Cian O'Regan and Clonmel and the other districts, and indeed Garda Jenny Goff and indeed Garda Claire Murphy and all the different Gardaí in Care and in Clonmel and throughout the county and counties and countries who are out there helping the people, the Natalie Curley Hale, in the spirit of the Mehel, going this extra mile. And we had a community care and we lost it, but thankfully it's been replaced to care again, a specific dedicated community care for the Garda Síochána, because the Gardaí must stand in the kitchens of the people if they want support of the people. But it's so frustrating for Gardaí, Minister, when they go into court and they get pulled asunder, and every issue in the book is taken out to undermine and that's the right of the person, of course, accused, is to have a proper defence and get his proven innocent. If he's innocent, or him or her, and innocent and proven guilty, must be always a ball mark and a standard we have to stand to, or aspire to. As I said, when you see people with 25 and 30 and 40 charges going off, and the whole situation of free legal aid, I don't see any. I believe firmly that 3 strikes and you're out there. People say 2, but 3. But when you see it going on, it's so frustrating for the Garda Síochána, and it undermines the community support for Gardaí as well. And I was taking the test today by the Taoiseach here for my feelings about certain issues. I was, because we had a great country here. We earned our freedom deeply, and I told a story about it, recalled Knockcoffey earlier in Councillor, and the valiant fight for freedom here. But many of these rights have been stripped away from us during COVID. Regularly, draconian legislation passed here. And we had a situation where the Minister for Health, when introducing the main bill about the restrictions, told Deputy Michael McNamara and myself that there was no penal provisions in the bill to penalise or criminalise or fine or imprison a cleric, a priest, saying Mass or hearing confessions. And he told us that he had never corrected a record in the House. And it's very important it's easy for a teacher to lecture me today, it's very important that ministers, especially, would ensure that if they do err or mislead at all, knowingly or otherwise, that they would correct it. And it hasn't been corrected. Hasn't. I've asked them time after time, and I've discussed it with you, Councillor. And then we had the church leaders meeting with the Taoiseach last Thursday week. And while they were meeting in one room, Minister for Health, Deputy Donnelly, was signing a statutory instrument which was underpinned in that legislation, which he denied, to make it a penal offence that priests could be criminalised. And we see the case with the priest in Father Hughes, wonderful man in Cavan, and the way he has been brought forward, of course, and many others. And we saw what happened in Athlone the weekend. So, I mean, we must have a balance always, and fair play is fine play with me. And we must, I'm involved in community alert since we're the second community alert group ever set up in the country. And in Newcastle, Coshar, Newer, Nashura, Tipperdown, Hess. And we were under Dungarvan Garda Station at that time. We're now back in the county boundaries in Tipperary. So the guards need our support, and they always must get it. And as I said, then the issue arose today about taxis not being allowed to have their drive-by protest tomorrow. And I know it's a gathering, probably in the essence of the word, I suppose it is a gathering, but they were driving and not getting out of the car and meeting anybody. And they were told clearly that if they did that, they'd be fined €100. So you have to think people are only trying to protect their living and trying to recover whatever living they had. These people invested in their vehicles, and all self-employed people invest in their job and in their career. And many of them go on to give employment and support other families as well. And that's all they're trying to do is rescue what they have lost and regain it and get some. Many of them that don't have a rateable building weren't getting any support literally because they had no premises, while the county councils and department officials worked hard to try and help people. There's not just enough money to go around, number one, but they were trying to do a protest. And I might have given the impression that taxis from Tipperary were coming. No, they contacted me to be sure and support their colleagues in Dublin who were representing them at Merrion Square in the morning. But it's not happening now because the Gardaí told them clearly if they turned up, they would be fined €100 per car numbers and possible court conviction. That is the fact of it. So where do you go? I mean, on the bill itself, it's vital, and we have a proud record here also of jury service. And I want to salute the jury, the public who have they don't volunteer for jury, but they take it up when they're asked. That's part of their civic duty, and they must be looked after. But we must also bring legislation and modernise it, and we must have an impact assessment of each piece of legislation. We had this debate here around a justice bill recently with yourself, Minister. It's 20 years on before we kind of reviewed the bill and were able to deal with layering anomalies that were in it. But as I said, this bill is an effort. I will support it, and I will also support. Good legislation. But I will always, no matter how good we make the legislation here, or you deal with your expertise in this department, Minister, and the drafters, there'll always be room for corrections. There'll be always unintended consequences. The 1964 law requiring a mandatory 5-year sentence for some convictions under the section of the Firearms Act has been declared unconstitutional by the Supreme Court. And I saw reference here in the notes, to a gentleman being arrested with a sawn-off shotgun, bottles of petrol, and stockings, and indeed other items. Anyone that goes around with that, whether they're under the influence of drugs or alcohol, and I pity them if they are, but it's a sawn-off shotgun is a lethal weapon. Lethal weapon, because it would cover the weight of this building at 10 or 15 feet and do untold damage. So we can't have situations where you just get suspended sentences for issues like that. To go over that, it's for a reason they go over it as an intent. When you raise that in with someone who has a shotgun in his own house, whether it's for shooting vermin, he's a licence because he's a farmer or whatever, and I've seen cases where they've shouted out at intruders breaking into their home that they have a gun. I've seen cases where the gun was taken off them. So we must have the balancing act of defending your home and defending your family and the rights to defend oneself. But Minister, I wish you well, as I have in the past. I know your senior minister now has gone off to greater things, and I wish her well in her voyage, and I wish her well with her new baby, and hope all goes well for her and her family. And I know Minister Humphreys will be taking over, but you have a big lot of issues in the Department of Justice to deal with, and goodness knows there is a lot of work there. But as I said, we must try and reform the free legal aid, and we must do the adversarial system of courts, and where we see courts, people in courts being sometimes being intimidated in the precincts of the court. There's no room for that. We must have the rule of law, and we must ensure it. And it's also parts of the research notes we saw here where sexual offences were being committed on minors, but worse than that, sexual and other offences being committed by minors. So we must ask ourselves what is going on in our society, in the homes, in the schools. And we know so much education now. We must have a real look at why, because it's so important that we have a civic society that are proud of their democracy. So that's what brings me to concern, the question I raised today, Minister, about our democratic rights, my democratic right here to ask questions, especially to the Minister for Health, and cannot get answers. I've asked them week in, week out, and not answered. I've chosen to, after the first week or two, to use my time asking questions, look for written answers, which she has plenty of officials to take note of my questions and answer. I have never got one. That is contempt for this House and for me and the people that I represent. Basic answers to basic questions, we need them. Now, Minister, you were protesting or demonstrating when Peadar Tobin was talking about the situation regarding the public workshop. It's enshrined in the European Courts of Justice, the European Courts of Human Rights, in the Nuremberg Convention. And I don't know why. We're the longest lockdown in nearly in the world now, but certainly in Europe. And we're one of only one of our 3 countries that, when we were in level 3 that were denied the right to worship. And they're namely Saudi Arabia and I think Korea, the North or South Korea. I don't like to be comparing us to those. We were used to spiritual nourishment. I said it today, Les Concora. I want the priests and the clergy of all denominations and none to be able, I wouldn't say none mightn't have any clergy, but they want them to be able to have the right to have spiritual, to be declared essential workers, because spiritual nourishment and people who have daily communicants and daily confessors and their faith is so important to them, whatever religion, they need that spiritual nourishment. It then passes on to their mental health. It nourishes their mental health and their physical health. So we have a fitter, healthier people. So the priest should be allowed to be able to visit and minister to their flock. That's their duty, first of all, under their ordination oaths, and they try to do that. But when they're prohibited, and we'll see what happened in Athlone on Sunday, and we'll see what happened in Father Hughes. There's no need for that, because the vast majority of people are obeying, and a few gather to prayer. Our Lord said, if a few gather in my name, you know, it's a wonderful thing, and we must look at that. But we must be sensitive, and we mustn't have situations like today where the taxi drivers are intimidated from having their protests. They wouldn't be on the street themselves, they weren't danger to anybody, and lets it go out that they weren't told. They were told quite clearly. They mightn't be told they couldn't go, but they were told if they came, they'd be fined and there'd be court proceedings. That's a totalitarianism, as far as I'm concerned, and it's the heavy-handed law. And I want to be able to ask my community, and I always do, to support and gather Síochána. Men and women give their life in this country for the uniform and for the freedom and for us to sleep in our beds. And there's a very thin line between that and anarchy, and we need to support them. And again, I salute Under Superintendent Laheen Clonmel and Superintendent Dennis Whelan here, and the community teams there and Tipperary Town and all over. The work they have done are doing, and what they're passing on. Yeah, and we need new recruits to see to aspire to go to the Gardaí. Gormargo, that's